Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today I'm joined by two guests, Lara Nercessian, who is an assistant prosecuting attorney for Wayne County. She is an active advocate in the Armenian American community, serving on numerous committees. In 2016, she was appointed by Governor Rick Snyder to become one of 15 members of the Michigan Genocide Education Council. And our other guest is Raffi Ourlian, who is the current chairman of the Armenian Community Center of Detroit. He is a fellow CPA and is a member of the Armenian Genocide Recognition Committee. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Lara, tell me more about the Michigan Genocide Education Council.
The council was formed to create the, I guess, I don't want to say standards, but create the curriculum for teaching genocide and Holocaust, the genocide and Holocaust, the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust, as well as other genocides. It's a topic that, unfortunately, up until the legislation passed that would require that being taught in Michigan schools, it was hit or miss whether or not teachers were teaching the subject in history or literature. We know that there were some school districts that would, but as I say, it was hit or miss. So now this council was created. The governor appointed 15 members to the council, and the council's role now is to actually create that curriculum, whether that be teaching resources, guidelines, a website, tools, all of those matters to help teach our students about genocide itself, what is genocide, the genocides that have occurred, the Armenian genocide specifically, and the Holocaust specifically.
Okay. So is it now being taught in all the schools, or is it still kind of a work in process?
It should be. The law states that it should now be taught in the schools, but the actual curriculum that is being created right now, it hasn't been passed on yet.
Oh, okay.
We're working on that.
Okay. When do you think that curriculum will be completed?
It should be completed by June.
Oh.
That is when the council is term limited till June.
Oh, okay. So would that curriculum go into effect in the fall of this year, or?
I don't have that answer for you, but the idea is to get it out immediately, actually. I mean, even before June.
Okay. Okay. So what was the Armenian Genocide?
The Armenian Genocide was a systematic extermination of a culture, a group of Armenians, 1.5 million Armenians, by the Turkish Ottoman Empire. It was plotted out, planned, and executed through death marches through the Syrian desert, through pillaging of villages, and just driving a race of people out. And the end result between 1915 through 1920-21 was the loss of 1.5 million Armenians by the Turkish Ottoman Empire. It was, as I said, plotted out, planned, and it's not a hidden secret or anything like that. It's well documented. Historians can all have consensus on it that it did happen. And it's a fact, and unfortunately, the Turkish government refuses to recognize the crime that they had committed over 100 years ago.
Okay. Now, I heard that the Turkish government hired lobbyists to try to defeat that legislation?
Absolutely, they sure did. They not only testified at the Senate education hearings, but they also lobbied behind the scenes. But unfortunately, the truth prevailed. I shouldn't say unfortunately, but fortunately, the truth prevailed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So April 24th will mark, is it the 103rd anniversary?
It is. Yeah, 103 years ago.
Okay. So what are some of the events that you'll be participating in to commemorate this sad event?
Well, do you want?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the Armenian community, I mean, in fact, Raffi actually chairs the committee that is hosting the commemoration this year, and Montel Williams is the speaker. He, along with Dean Cain, who played Superman, as many may know and recognize him from, they produced a documentary called Architects of Denial. And so Montel Williams will be here in Michigan to talk about that documentary and his experiences throughout producing it. So that's one event, as well as showing Architects of Denial here at the Maple Theater.
Yeah, we're going to have a showing of the documentary. Obviously, the churches have a commemoration on April 24th, and we might have other events as well. For us, it's always something that is important for us, and we organize very well and have these events so that not only do the Armenians come together, but that the world knows. And you've been to our events, and we look forward to having you at these events as well.
Well, I will certainly try to attend.
And I think that is the importance of this documentary, actually, is because, you know, it wasn't actually just made by Armenians. It's made by two individuals who had no knowledge about the Armenian Genocide, and then they produced this documentary because they felt this need to get this information out to people other than Armenians. Armenians know their history, but it's time that others, non-Armenians, know the history too, because it has been buried for so long. And when you're fighting for, you know, simply recognition, when you're fighting to have it taught in schools, it's important to have individuals who are not just Armenian on your side discussing this topic, this historical topic.
Yeah, and I would say that that's a common theme where we see, whether it's a celebrity or a non-Armenian, that when they hear about this and when they start to look into it, it really gets their attention, and their first reaction is, how come I didn't know about this beforehand? And that's one of the things that Montel Williams has said, is that, you know, how is it that I didn't know this, you know, being educated here, and a lot of people are that way. And once you understand what's happened and then you see the denial from the Turkish government, I think that really, you know, as they say, it's just a continuation of genocide, and I think that's what gets people's attention. Like, how could they have done this, and how could they think they're going to get away with it? Which obviously they're not. I think as long as we have people, you know, in this world, Armenian or non-Armenian, that believe in the humanitarian cause and want to truly stop genocide, then you have to stop the first one that happened in the 19th century.
Okay. So, are there any reasons why this genocide took place?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a complex reason. You've got the fall of the Ottoman Empire. You've got minority populations wanting to seek independence. And then you have, coupled with that, as the Ottoman Empire is crumbling, and you've got various areas of that Ottoman Empire crumbling, and those minority factions wanting their independence, there's the worry of here in Anatolia that the Armenians will want that too, and you've also coupled that with a wave of nationalism that was sweeping in this concept of pan-Turkism, and who's in the way but Armenians who are not Turkic people, who are Christians, who don't share this Turkic identity, in the way of spreading that concept of pan-Turkism. So it's actually pretty complex, but I would say those are the reasons. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's a good summary of it. And I think, you know, when what people don't realize is when the perpetrators, when the Ottoman Empire fell, the Allies, the British, they were actually on the run, and there were arrest warrants to bring these people to justice for the crimes they committed, and they found safe harbor, albeit not for long, in different countries. But it kind of gives you a perspective that how guilty they were of this, that they were on the run. They seeked asylum in different countries. And they're, you know, all these allies and all these groups that, you know, brought the Ottoman Empire down were looking for them, and they were held responsible and accountable, so they avoided their own trials.
Okay. What is the significance of Deir ez-Zor?
Well, do you want to take that?
Sure, sure. Deir Zor, it's very symbolic. It was the desert that Armenians marched through and eventually got to Deir Zor in Syria. And a lot of Armenians started their life there. It became a very big Armenian community. They had built a beautiful genocide memorial there. In fact, you could have gone to Deir Zor in the desert and literally found bones of our people, the Armenian people that were sent on death marches. And had it been a existence for many years as an Armenian community, we've had pilgrimages to Deir Zor to see where our people settled, and a lot of people settled there and moved on to different places like Aleppo to Lebanon. And most recently with the Syrian war, Deir Zor was totally desiccated. The Armenian churches were destroyed, the monuments were destroyed, and it was just totally wiped out as if nothing ever was in Deir Zor.
Which I would say is quite symbolic. I mean, it's actually, it compounds the tragedy of the Armenian genocide, that this, where we were, forced to flee to and forced to go to, the monument of those people who died on those death marches is then destroyed, and then their history just turned to sand. And you've got the populations of Armenians. Syria was heavily populated by Armenians. It was, I would say, almost like a hub of the Armenian diaspora. And then you have this monument to why these Armenians are here in this area, now destroyed. It's pretty significant that now there's like another wave of having to flee and another wave of having to restart their lives.
Okay. How are Armenians treated in Turkey today?
I would say not well.
Yeah.
There are that I get of it also, I would say, is pretty complex. You've got there's multiple layers there. You've got individuals who have, in fact, are Armenian, but they're considered hidden Armenians. They've grown up Turkish. Their identity is Turkish, and now they find out that they are Armenian, and that's something hard for them to swallow, because to be Armenian, you can call someone an Armenian, and it's like the equivalent of calling them a dog. But I would say it's not exactly a friendly environment, but then there is a healthy Armenian community there too. A very healthy Armenian community.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of talent that we have there.
Oh, absolutely.
As Lara says, I think they're all very cautious. I think over the last couple of years we've seen what's happened in Turkey with the crackdown and how professors are hauled off to jail, educators are hauled off to jail. Very much a dictatorship that's there. And obviously we have a bit of history there as well, as one of our famed reporters, Hrant Dink, who was a reporter at a Turkish newspaper, was critical of the Turkish government, spoke of the Armenian genocide, and unfortunately he was assassinated in the streets. This was 12 years ago or so, and that is a major, obviously, violation in journalism, right? Obviously, in taking of a human life. It's unheard of, and this is not just one time. There's been multiple examples of that, where Armenians continue to be the victim there for speaking out. Not even just Armenians, anybody that speaks out against Erdogan, the Turkish government, you might as well expect to be in jail as a best case scenario.
Okay. Now, you brought in a speaker, was it Garan last year?
Garo Pailan.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
And I remember him saying, that it's important to remember the Armenian genocide, but it's more important to remember the people who are being imprisoned today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a concept of, we can't just live in the past either. We have to consider that there are people struggling there right now. There are people struggling, journalists, writers, activists that are struggling there right now, and that we have to be conscious of it, that this isn't just an issue of history. There is present human rights violations going on that we need to focus on, and that it's not just a matter of commemorations, it's a matter of being an activist for what is going on right now too. Because those activists, those journalists, those writers, they're speaking about the past, but they're being harmed presently, and they're being stifled presently. So what he wants is, this diaspora to voice their support for the people there in Turkey now. Don't forget that there is a community now whose voice is being, fought against, and so we need to support what is actually occurring presently.
Yeah, and I think that the Armenian people, as well as other minorities there, have become obviously more activists, and seeing the Hrant Dink being a victim hasn't silenced them. I think that on April 24th, you'll see gatherings there. You'll see commemorations. Even at the Hrant Dink funeral 12 years ago, you should have seen all the people that were there. Armenians, non-Armenians, Turkish, that stood up and said, "You guys can't do this just because you don't like what someone's writing or saying, or you're trying to change the truth. You can't do that." And I personally believe it's just a matter of time till they are going to admit what they did in 1915, and the pressure continues to mount on them.
Although I think it was about a year ago when there were protests, and Erdogan motioned to his security forces
In D.C.
to attack.
Oh yes, that was in Washington D.C.
Washington,
and you had firsthand. I mean, some of the people that were involved there.
I do. The Armenian National Committee was there, along with Kurdish citizens who were there protesting, and there is video of that motion and of those guards going and attacking the protesters. I mean, these are protesters who are on public land, who are abiding by the laws and are protesting peacefully, and they're attacked by foreign agents, and not only attacked, but brutally attacked. And we're talking about being kicked in the head. We're talking about being kicked in the body multiple times. And my understanding is that some of them are being prosecuted. But this is something that we can't tolerate as a nation. As a nation, we shouldn't allow, protesters. I mean, let alone protesters being attacked anyway, but foreign agents attacking protesters on our soil. You're guests in our country, and you're attacking our citizens.
Ordered by their president.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very brutal video. It was very bad. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Turkey established gun control in 1911, and Germany established gun control in 1938. And shortly thereafter, you had the Holocaust and the Armenian Genocide. Do you see any ties between gun control and?
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay.
I really don't. Long and short of it, no, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that these things happen because they're obviously poor leadership, and it's directed by bad leaders to go out and exterminate people. I don't think that the gun control laws have any bearing on that. People are going to follow their directions, the armies and soldiers, and unfortunately they did. Not all of them. Some of them actually helped the victims get away, and but that happens. I don't think that the two are related, in my opinion.
I agree.
Okay, so you don't think if the citizenry is disarmed, that makes it easier?
Again, I think that just breaks it down a little bit too simply. When you're talking about genocide, it's a slow process, and if you're talking about the mass of a government and their armies versus people, I don't think your gun control is going to amount to a hill of beans, to be honest. But these are two complex of situations, and I wouldn't say that gun control, if you're to take away all the guns from a citizenry, then they're susceptible to this genocide. Well, it's a tough subject.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And in retrospect, obviously, the right to bear arms, if those people had that ability, and they did, but they took the guns away from them, maybe, potentially there wouldn't be 1.5 million, but there would still be a huge number, because they were up against a huge army, a killing machine, whether it be the Armenians or the Jewish people being killed by the Nazis. It was just, you couldn't have put up a fight against that.
And gun control itself is pretty complex too. You're talking about whether that's more stringent laws, or are you talking about abolishing the right to have weapons in any form? So I mean, that in of itself would have to be clarified, I think.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't think that that's a question. That's a question that can be answered very simply without a little bit more discussion and in-depth discussion as to what you mean by that.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that in those examples, I don't think it would have helped. But I think flash forward to today, I think that's what keeps countries and people safe. Like take, for example, Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, that if those people didn't have the right to bear arms, Azerbaijan would probably attack or try to invade them as they did 2 years ago. So it's a different world that we live in today. I think that back then, I don't think it would have mattered.
And you have plenty of countries with gun control that haven't seen genocide.
Okay. In 1939, Hitler said in a speech, "Who speaks today of the extermination of the Armenians?" Your thoughts on that?
Well, that was his justification that, we could do this act, we can, this is on the way to invade Poland, we can commit these atrocities because no one cared. No one cared about the Armenians. The world stage turned a blind eye. The world stage, looked upon it very briefly and then chose to ignore the atrocities, to the Armenians. And so, yeah, and that's why that comment is actually so significant, because fortunately, this time, the world stage didn't turn a blind eye. The world looked, and the world looked in horror, and the world acted and continues to act upon it. Now, no one can forget what happened to the Jewish people, and should never forget what happened to the Jewish people. And it's such a wonderful slap in the face of Hitler that is true, that people still are talking about it. It's being taught. The fact that it's now required teaching to teach the Holocaust, it's such a wonderful slap in the face of that comment.
Yeah, and I think also what he knew was that there were a lot of German officials that were on the ground in Turkey during 1915. They actually learned from watching the Turks in action. So I think when you flash forward to that statement, he probably said, hey, we saw firsthand how to do this, how to get away with it, and that's why he said the statement he did.
Okay. What is the United States' official position on the Armenian genocide?
Well, I think that officially they don't want to upset Ankara, Turkey, so they don't make mention of it. But they know, I think, obviously, our democracy here has enough documentation. Washington, D.C. knows what happened at that time frame. The historians know. They have all the cables. They know exactly what's happening. The former ambassador, Morgenthau, had many cables back to Washington, D.C. So their official position is they don't want to upset Ankara, Turkey. but they know what really happened. And sometimes politicians, when they're running, they'll say, they'll speak the truth and they know that it's happened, but when they get to office, they unfortunately can't say anything. I think that's referred as the gag order.
Right. With being allies with Turkey, no one wants to upset that balance, regardless of how they may actually intellectually know about the genocide and know the truth of the Armenian genocide. There is still, for diplomatic reasons, it still hasn't been officially recognized.
Okay. And many elected officials say they're going to recognize it, but once elected, they don't.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is the tragedy of it, that history can be, I guess, whitewashed just for the sake of diplomatic relations.
Yeah, I think the only president that I know in modern times that actually said it, within the last 30, 40 years was Ronald Reagan.
That's
I think
true.
he did say the genocide word on April 24th. And I'm sure back then in the 80s that was an uproar from Turkey on why he said it. And I don't know of anyone else that has said it. But again, I think a lot of politicians are our friends and they do support this. And really it's the State Department that doesn't want it said.
Right.
They don't want to disrupt the relationship with Turkey. And I'll be someone, we have to step back and see what that relationship really is. I think we've seen over the last 10, 12 years that, that they are not a trusted ally. They're not United States' friend. I think that, people have to step back and look at that and reevaluate that.
Well, as far as being an ally, in World War I, they entered the war on the side of Germany.
Yes, they did.
So, okay. Do you believe Turkey will ever admit to the genocide?
That is the hope. That is the hope.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I think that they will. I think that what we've seen over the last couple of years, there's turmoil, there's issues. You just can't run a country the way that it's being run there, and sooner or later they're going to have to face their history because we're not going to stop demanding justice.
And even if Turkey doesn't recognize it, the rest of the world stage does.
That's right.
You have world organizations that do, you have countries that do, you have states that do, citizens that, that are students that are learning about it. Really, quite frankly, and this is my personal opinion, it doesn't really matter if Turkey recognizes it. As long as the public is educated about it and knows about it, that's what's important.
Okay. Well, that will do it for today. So I want to thank both of you for coming on. Is there any other events that you want to talk about?
Well, I think our event on April 21st at the Edsel Ford High School in Dearborn, our guest speaker is Montel Williams, and we look forward to having a big crowd there and really honoring his work that he did for our cause. So, and I want to thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure. So,
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.